Howdy folks, hope everyone can hear me okay. This is the next version of the live stream, which I've now figured out has exactly a 15-second interval between when I say go live and when anything happens out in the real world. Alright, let's switch to the main camera, let's start the show. Hey guys, thanks everyone for joining us. We're coming at you here from Franklin, Tennessee, just outside Nashville. For the moment, the weather is shining, so I'm trying to make do with natural light here. Plus, this is the new camera. This is a Lumix G7, which I spent all morning studying the manual for, and I'm not entirely comfortable with my knowledge of it at this point, as referenced by the fact that I've got the whole thing set in absolutely auto mode right now because I can't seem to get it to allow me to do, fine focusing and auto exposure correction and things like that without showing all sorts of on-screen grids and everything that would have me framed up as if there's a target around my head the entire time, which, given the current state of the world right now, makes me a little uncomfortable. So just saying. Anyway, I hope hope everything looks okay for y'all. We should have a, I hope, fairly interesting show today, but I'm also going to try to keep it to the hour because I got plans for the weekend, and like the rest of you, I imagine, y'all are heading out. I'm heading up to Gettysburg and going to see the folks up there, and apparently play a socially distanced game of poker, which that sounds like fun. But masks and all, and I guess the good news about wearing a bandana when you're playing poker is that way when I take them for all their money, I'll already be dressed like a robber. So there's that in case you're watching. Anyway, so what we will be doing today, we'll be talking a lot about digital distribution. We have some moves we've got potentially planned, but I want to get your feedback on them before we actually pull the trigger on any of that stuff. And hit some other stuff. I want to hit your questions, so if you have questions about using the program and such, there's several that folks sent in I want to address, but also if you guys have anything that occurs to you, please send it my way. I'll hit as many of those things as I can. We don't have any major program updates this week. The 3804 is still the current build for 2 weeks running, so no need to download again if everything's working okay for you. I think the last thing we addressed was an issue where the if you went to collection statistics and it did a breakdown by something, it wasn't necessarily remembering your plays, what your previous breakdown was, so it would always default to something that was different than it meant. Anyway, nothing serious. We're spent a lot of time this week working on actually the next version of things, so pushing forward, which I hope to give you a status report on that one in a few weeks, but I don't want to get into it today. I do want to talk about a little bit the auction reports. It's been an interesting couple weeks for auctions coming out of Heritage, our partners on kind of the high end of things. So just to I'm going to hide some things here and put up some stuff so I can see what's going on, and get my notes ready. And so let's see if the still thing is working here. So pound it over to here, and let's hit graphic number 2. All right, yes, yes, my friend Irma. So remember how I've been saying for the last several weeks that comedy titles from the 40s and 50s, which honestly had very little collector interest, period, are starting to really freaking take off. My friend Irma was originally a radio show. You can watch it. If you guys, by the way, if you guys are looking for something different than Netflix and chill, which is just kind of cool to do, old-time radio from starting in the 40s, going through, really, I'd say the heyday lasted through probably the early 60s. The format of radio during that time was it had everything. It had everything that TV eventually had. It had dramas, it had crime shows, it had comedies, and so forth. And my friend Irma was kind of a dopey, household, sitcom, really, but it was done as a radio drama, so you could listen to it and be sitting in the car, driving along on a road trip and laughing along with the wacky adventures of Irma. So it was adapted into comic format eventually, and where it had a respectable run. It did, again, what a lot of things that weren't Archie did. They ran for a good 5, 6, 7 year run. Nobody remembered them, and then they kind of lay there forgotten once the superhero era hit. As a result, there probably aren't that many of these in great condition. So if you are a collector of them, it's actually something that's a little hard to get. So anyway, my friend Irma, number 39, again, a nothing issue. It's not number 1. It's not a first appearance of anyone important or anything like that. sold in CGC 7.5 condition for a few $100. What's the big deal about that? The big deal is it was expected to sell for about, guaranteed. It would say about, the survey would have said about $80 is what that thing should have brought in. Instead, it brought in 216. Way up in terms of the absolute valuation. One of the fun ones up here, Cowpuncher. You can't not love this cover. It's just so over the top in every way. Cowpuncher number 6 CGC sold for 1,427% of its expected value. It sold for $840. I say watch these forgotten titles by forgotten publishers from the 40s and 50s. And man, if you've got a shop in your neighborhood that's got that $10 and under, maybe it's a $20 and under box, it might be worth time doing some scavenging on these ones, because man, if you turn up some stuff, it's starting to go somewhere. Next example, this one would be Date with Millie. I believe, I could be wrong on this one, but I believe Date with Millie eventually became Modeling with Millie, which eventually became Millie the Model, which became the only comic that Stan Lee had to work with for a period right before he launched Spider-Man. So it's, in a way, it's almost a little bit historical. It's being rediscovered these days by folks who really love tracing early Marvel history. That one just sold, Date with Millie number 7, just sold in CGC 9.0, which actually, it's a decent copy. That's, it is almost near mint. $2,280, or 2,275% of its expected valuation based on its previous guide. You will be seeing lots of movements along these titles in the next update, so watch out for that. That's going to be an area of big movers and shakers. And there's some other, interesting ones that went out there. Not everything is gold. Ginger, title we talked about later, that were uncertified. In other words, they were non-slabbed and they were 4.0s, which means they were the junk copies you would expect to have out there. Those ones sold at negative valuation after the big move that the CGC ones made from the previous weeks. But then, once again, repeating a weird trend that, I don't even know what to make of this. 5 pages of Detective Comics number 29 sold separately for a total of $1,308. And these are shredded up, ripped to heck, crumbling copies of, a comic that was 3 years into Batman's run. So, the interesting $1,300, man, I wouldn't pay it, but someone did, and this is getting to be a thing. So anyway, that's the auction report for this week. Sorry, don't have time to draw up a formal one this week because, like I say, I'm getting out of here for the weekend. And by the way, if anyone has a lot of knowledge about Cub Cadet repair, mine stopped running. I got about 2 rows of of mowing the lawn earlier in the day here, and it just up and went out on me. New battery did not solve the whole problem, and the Cub Cadet repair guy is going to be out until after Labor Day. So when I get back from my vacation, my lawn is going to look terrible. Anyway, all right, let me just double check with the comments on here and say hi to folks. And also make a good time to make sure that my keying is working properly. Greg says hi, everyone. Greg, by the way, shout out to him. He's done a great job just coordinating things behind the scenes, make sure everything works smoothly for marshaling questions and everything else there. He's saying hi from New Jersey. Andre is raining out here in Quebec, and the weather report from Washington says it's doing okay. Well, sunny and warm. Okay, and Minnesota, Oreo, kind of ashamed to be inside. Yeah, it's not great. We honestly, we had like a tornado yesterday, touchdown, quite close to the house. It was a little nervous, but Tennessee, go figure. And now I'm sweating about not being able to mow my lawn. All right, so let's see here. Mike points out XM has a great channel. I've been listening to Green Hornet. I was a communist for the FBI, Jack Benny, etc. By the way, if you guys ever saw the old Dragnet TV show, that was taken directly from the Dragnet radio show. It's like, my name is Friday, I wear a badge. That great stuff. Highly recommended. And Greg points out it's a headlight issue of Cowpuncher. Yes, headlight for all of us who are 1,000 years old is what the mooks and the broads from back in the day would refer to as women's more prominent anatomical features. Yeah, anyway, this was a thing, and it got a lot of attention, especially in early Overstreet guides, but like I said, I just like it because it's an over-the-top cover in just so many ways. Another way, by the way, to get outstanding valuation for your old comic books is to have been mentioned anywhere in Seduction of the Innocent. Is not a book about, as they say, prominent anatomical features. No, it's by Frederick Wortham. He's the guy who was more or less the instigator for the comic scare that led up to the foundation of the Comics Code. He wrote a book in the 1950s called Seduction of the Innocent, where he compiled together a bunch of material he had put together originally, I want to say, for Family Circle magazine. I might have the magazine wrong, but he collected into a book, and it was based on his work as a psychologist working with children who were juvenile delinquents. And he said, the one thing I've found in is they all read crime comics, which of course at the time everyone read crime comics. And by crime he defined it so loosely that he was counting, Tales from the Crypt as a crime comic because bad things happened in it, and axe murderers would roam the neighborhood and whatever else. And so basically it was all unwholesome reading for the children. And as a result of that and the Kefauver investigations in the Senate, it led to all the comics publishers, quite opportunistically, I would say, both looking out for themselves and saying, hey, absolutely, we are willing to have a industry, to put a stamp of approval saying that this is a safe comic. And the Comics Code seal, if you saw it in the original, it was about the size of a very, very large postage stamp, and it shrunk over the years. It gets smaller and smaller until it was barely visible, until they eventually stopped caring. But Marvel, DC, Archie, and a few others became very big proponents of the Comics Code, and most notably EC Comics, which is the Tales from the Crypt guys. Were basically, the Comics Code in its original inception banned almost everything that was a hallmark of EC Comics at the time. You couldn't have pictures of werewolfism and vampirism and The Walking Dead. You couldn't have terms like terror be in larger than average type on the cover. You couldn't show policemen or forces of law in a negative light and so forth. So it was all the things that EC Comics basically specialized in. So the long and the short story of EC Comics is all their comics they tried rebooting a few times, but eventually they all went under. And the only thing that survived was a humor magazine they did called Mad Magazine, which they switched into magazine format to escape the distribution squeeze that not having the Comics Code would have on you. Because Curtis, I believe it was Curtis Distribution at the time, wouldn't really distribute anything that didn't have the Comic Code seal. And so the only way you could get out of that problem was to not be distributed by the people who distributed comic books. And so Mad switched that by going from a comic book format to a magazine format, which then they stayed for until the current day. And last laugh on them, they're doing better. They outlived all of their competitors basically, and are selling better than almost all of them. So anyway, that's the short condensed version of the Comic Code. I have no idea how I got onto it. I was mentioning that if you got mentioned in Seduction of the Innocent, which is actually a hardcover book, and it had lots and lots of references to comic books at the time, that immediately now amongst collectors makes your book especially valuable. So it's one of those things. Okay, what else do we have going on in the comments? And just the facts, ma'am. Absolutely. All right. Okay, to hit some comments that people, or questions people hit me over the last couple of days. I just want to go over these, and then I want to get into the whole question of digital. So Heath Herring had a question that says, sharing a database, I'm afraid I don't have these queued up as graphics, so you'll have to bear with me. Heath Herring was having a problem where you used to be able to share a database on a network drive using the old database format, the Access or the JET database format that we used prior to ComicBase 2020. But when you do it in ComicBase 2020 with its new SQLite database format, if you try to open the database and it's on a network share that starts with / and then name of some network drive, you just get a note saying, open database has failed, try not putting this on a network shared database. This is true. It is apparently a limit to SQLite, but there is a workaround, and it's quite simple. All you have to do is take your network drive, and instead of sharing it as I think it's called a UNC file name. It's the one that starts with / and then name of your server / the name of the drive, etc. All you have to do is map that to a network drive letter. So basically go to your network share, click the map network drive command in Windows and turn it into like, your Q drive or your Z drive, at which point it gets a path like, Q:// ComicBase database.cbdb, and it works fine. So a little bit of an extra step you gotta do once, but it's a solution at least. Okay, Sean had a sent us a note, basically said, I've got a bad problem. My collection is lost. And this is, this guy sounds terrible. This is a common problem, and the good news is it's not what it looks like. So what happened is one day he was using ComicBase and he's got all his books in his database, and then the next day he goes and he opens up ComicBase and he sees none of his books. So what's really going on if that happens? Alright, so the good news is ComicBase didn't just throw out all your stuff. What has happened, and it's easy to do, is you opened a different database than you were working with last time. So every time you launch ComicBase, ComicBase is always going to open the last database you opened. So usually you just double-click the ComicBase icon, you're back where you were, and so forth. If you ever somehow get into a state, where you launch ComicBase one day and you don't see your stuff, what has happened is just like imagine if you were typing a document in Word, like I'm typing my doctoral thesis or something, right? I've got draft after draft after draft, and then I open up Word one day and I don't see all my work. Word didn't throw out all your stuff. You just opened a different document, right? So that if you just find the right document on your drive, you're good to go. So anyway, this is it's a common enough problem because this is just kind of baked into computers. It's back in ComicBase 7 we made the decision, which we've often looked back on and wondered whether we made the right choice on this one. But in ComicBase 7 we made it possible to have more than one database. As a result, we kind of set ourselves up to have this particular problem where you're not, because you have more than one database, it's possible to have the wrong database. If that ever happens to you, what I would do is, first of all, just go under your file menu, go open. Well, actually, if you go recent databases, there's every chance in the world it's one of these, in which case just, open it up. Here, let's open up mine right now. Open it up, you're good to go. Here, I'll take something I actually have a few of, and, really, you can barely see it. Really do need to darken up those highlights on the green theme here. It's by the way, this is a bit of a digression here, but if you'll notice in ComicBase, we try very much, you can probably make it out. There's this very, very light green stripe. I'm on the green theme of I forget the name of the particular theme, but it's the green variant of it, and the highlight colors on it look really bright and vivid on our 4K calibrated monitors that we all use in the art departments around here. And depending on how cheap and uncalibrated your monitor is, it might be darn near imperceptible. We try to steer down the middle road on those ones, but I'm going to say I'm looking at this right now on a really cheap monitor I keep next to my main monitor, which I do the broadcast off of because it has the right resolution. And like I say, it's like, yeah, that's pretty darn subtle. We might want to go a couple shades darker on that in the future. So anyway, but back to the question at hand. So here you see I've got my stuff. Now if I go and I open up a different database, like here's the stock ComicBase database here, and I'm going to be at the same title, Batman and Robin, up, and of course it's so old that it's doing a database patch up, so I'm just going to vamp over that while it does that. Anyway, so what would happen is if I'm looking at that and it says zeros everywhere, all that's really happened is I've opened the wrong database. So first line of defense is I would go up under here, under the file menu, and I would look at my recent databases and see if there's another one there that is working properly. And I'm running out of vamping ability here, so I'm actually going to talk about, if you ever see this dialogue, what that is all about. So every once in a great while, and apparently because I kept this particular database around purely for purposes of having an old database around at some point. Anyway, every once in a while we actually will do something that involves us going ahead and recalculating and rebuilding some fields in the issues in particular. I'm going to say the most recent thing we did here is we forced a standardization of all the date fields to be in order which is acceptable on any system, regardless of whether you're in US, Canada, Australia, France, etc. All of them will be able to read the dates properly without any kind of grief. And so just because there had been an issue, we are forcing kind of a patch up of all the date fields in all your databases to be in that particular format. So when that sort of thing happens, or when we do something that involves, say, adding new fields to the database, or new capabilities that affect your data as opposed to just the program itself, sometimes what we have to do is we have to go, and we do this inline. We don't make you do anything special, but the very first time you open the database after we've done one of these big patches, is it'll say, hey, I need a few minutes, I'm going to need to, check over some stuff or patch up some stuff, at which point it'll go into this, sort of mode where it grinds for a bit, and it does all the necessary changes to your database so before it can move on and do its thing. So what I had meant to do, and I'm gonna cheat here a little bit, because unfortunately I lucked myself into opening a very old database, so it's doing a lot of work right now, and it probably will take exactly 1 minute longer than I want it to do its thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat and open a second copy of ComicBase. And excuse me for just a moment. Yes, welcome to source code. I'm going to open up, and let's ignore for a moment that you're looking slightly into the future on this one. So I'm going to squish this down, move this up. So here's a second copy of ComicBase. And let's go ahead and show you what I meant to show you before. Anyway, so if you're looking around and you don't see the data you mean to be seeing right now, and it's not immediately under your recent databases, your next thing you want to do is go into your File menu and go to File Tools. And under File Tools, there's an option right here that says ComicBase Database Manager. Now, like I said, this problem, darn, I can't do that right now because this is the experimental version, which doesn't have that part installed. So this is annoying. All right, I'm gonna get to this anyway. All right, kids, don't do what you're about to see me do. All right. So Pete, you say, you devilish scoundrel. If I could have just launched the database manager, why are you making me quit ComicBase to launch it? All right, first of all, let's talk about what the heck am I even doing? All right, so there's a program which we had an intern write for us one summer, which the only thing this thing does is scan down your hard drive, find things that look like ComicBase databases, open them up, and let you see what's in them. And I'm being too clever by half right now because, and I'm about to answer my own question. So what this thing does is it kind of says, all right, well, look, you've got the following 20 files on your disk, which all look like ComicBase databases, and here's the things that are inside each of them. Now imagine that you're looking at data here, right? At which point you can say, oh, I accidentally opened up ComicBase database, which has nothing in it. I meant to be opening up Pete's database, which has a whole bunch of stuff in it. And here you see that, it finally did stuff. All right. So now you ask yourself, well, wait, this sounds like a very useful utility. Why don't you let me open this thing up while ComicBase is running? And you're getting your answer right here when you see these, these red ones here, or you see that these ones over here aren't being opened up, and so they're showing is essentially unavailable databases. What is happening is, while your ComicBase is doing certain things, like, I don't know, rebuilding item lists in it, it's in a state where it can't have another program come into it and start opening up stuff and checking things. It just won't work. You can't have two processes pounding on the same database at the same time, depending on what they're doing. So what we do is we make you close ComicBase before you start running this program. All right, so let's see what we found here. All right, so you notice that I've been opening up this thing called ComicBase database. And if you look around here, I've got all these other databases on my disk. I'm going to make this window a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So for instance, I've got an Express database here, which has 0 comics and 0 value in it. Here's the database I was setting out to open. It eventually got done with its thing. It has 0 comics and 0 value in it, which is to say it's the stock database that comes with ComicBase. That's the one that you probably were attempting to open when you freaked out and said, oh my god, where all my comics go. But the good news is, you'll see that down here are a whole bunch of things like this Livestream copy of Pete's ComicBase database, which has 60,000 comics in it, you know, worth, in theory, $1.2 million, which, again, if you guys remember last Livestream, I don't actually own Action 1. I just said I did for the sake of, you know, the production. So anyway, what you would do is just find your right database, click Use this database, it'll exit the program, and it'll say, hey, you're good to go. Next time you launch ComicBase, it'll have reset the preferences in ComicBase, so it will automatically open up the database that you chose, at which point you can go ahead and just, you know, launch the program and you're back where you were. That said, if you're someone who's not a developer of ComicBase, by all means, if you see, you know, databases like this that like aren't, you know, they aren't, you know, they're backups with 0 in them, or they aren't openable and you don't need them and things like that, by all means, go ahead and just click, you know, each one of them and just hit delete database. Go ahead and do some house cleaning while you're there. It doesn't hurt at all. Just don't delete your one and only copy of your one and only good database. And you don't need to delete your backups, but, you know, by all means, feel free to do some house cleaning. One thing that has definitely happened over the years is you know, we have a lot of people who've had a lot of versions of ComicBase on their disks, and a lot of times things just pile up. Is we'll see when we do tech, you know, support for folks, and we, you know, they set up a remote session for us so we can help them out, you know, on their computer. A lot of times people will have, you know, 50, 60 copies of databases on their machine. There's no need for that. Go ahead and do some house cleaning. You know, help yourself out. And by the way, just a note about the colors here. You'll notice that these ones in red, you know, and it even says as much. The red ones are databases it can't open. Test damaged database. In other words, I have databases on my machine that are intentionally damaged so that we can have them around to test how ComicBase deals with certain types of, you know, database damage. You know, this is one that we can certainly get rid of. I guess Darren hit one point. Some guy named Darren once had a damaged database. We clearly helped him out because it's from a long time ago. I'm going to leave alone some of these other working files I've got here, and also some other bits right here. And you'll notice also that when I started this whole thing, that it was trying to open up some other databases that I was actively in the process of rebuilding and messing with. So don't be in too much of a hurry if that ever happened to you. If you somehow cheated, you know, the launch, you know, thing like I attempted to do, and it just says, look, I can't open this right now. Go ahead and let it do another scan. All right, now you'll see right now it's scanning far and wide right now. It's you know, and this is the whole job of this program, is that it will go and it'll scan literally every available disk you've got, every available folder you've got, and it will take quite a while. I've got, you know, test folders on this machine with literally millions of picture thumbnails in them. So, you know, it takes a while to run even on my machine. But that is normal. So anyway, just backing the whole story up though, if you open up ComicBase, you don't see what you expect to see. Step 1, look up under File, look under Recent Databases, see if one of these is your recent database. If you don't see it, go to File, go to File Tools, choose ComicBase Database Manager, and here, once again, what it will attempt to do is say, do you want to exit ComicBase and launch the Database Manager? At which point, you'll search your hard drive, find the database you want, say use this database, and you're good to go. All right, I hope that was somewhat clear, despite the 16 threads that we went into while we were addressing the whole thing. All right. Okay. Just the Facts Man. Great. Just he says great name for a comic. All righty. All right. Well, I'm not sure if headlight issue or just the Facts. You know, it's a headlight issue. That'd be a good name for an auto repair store. Anyway. Okay, so, and let me see, were there any other choices? Oh, I wanted to, yes, I got a question about sending in corrections of pictures. So, we covered this one before, so I'm going to be a little bit brief on it, but the question came in of, he said basically, like, I've got pictures you don't have, how do I send them to you? And the basic, you know, the basic shtick goes like this, is take the picture, and I'm going to just take a picture on my own hard drive here. I'm going to say number 1, we'll take number 1 just because it'll be easy to see. I'm going to rearrange some windows here so I can move stuff around. Give me just a second. Okay. Alright, so let me mimic the situation as soon as I find my mouse. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away picture number 1 and picture number, I don't know, 5. All right, and I'm just going to, all right, and now we're going to go in, and I'm going to refresh this title, and oh my goodness, whatever happened to my picture for issue number 1 and issue number 5? Suddenly they're blank. Well, all right, so what we're simulating here is that you've got a picture and we don't have a picture. All right, so basically it comes down to this. And let me go ahead and get this one. Matter of fact, I know. It was Cowpuncher number... Goodness gracious. Cowpuncher number 6. I'm going to throw that one into the mix. All right, because we just got that as an auction report. Okay. So, basically, for any kind of picture you want to add to the database, and this also answers a question for an Express user who wanted to add his own pictures. So, if you want to add your own pictures, find the picture from wherever you find the picture. All right, so here's the picture for issue number 5 over here on the side here. Basically, call it 5.jpg, or if you've got a variant like it's number 5a, call it 5-a.jpg. Why not slash? Because you can't have slash in a Windows file name. So we use dash instead. All right. But anyway, basically take the picture, save as a JPEG, drag it on top of the grid, and as soon as I do that, magic happens. Because, first of all, what it did is it took that, and I can show it right here, is it made a copy of the picture and moved it to the right place in this long stream of file path. Which is your pictures, wherever you keep your pictures, D, DC, B, Batman and Robin, and issue number 5. It did all that filing for you, so you don't need to worry about that stuff. It also made the thumbnail for you, and also, if you go backward and forward, you'll see that very quickly loads up everything in that issue because it cached the thumbnails as it went. You might have noticed that it was doing a little spinny routine right here as it checked to make sure that there were no new thumbnails or anything that was missing. All right. So that's part 1, and while I'm at it here, I'm going to go ahead and dump issue number 1 in there, and also let's go over to Cowpuncher, because I'll bet you that the auction picture is better than the one we got. Cowpuncher number 6. Let's see what we got. Oh, so if I drag this guy in, all right, awesome. So what it's saying is we had an existing picture, which was 453 wide by 646. And the new one, it's green, so you can tell it's better. 793 by 1118 pixels, and so I'm going to say replace. All right. And so what it did then is it just copied that into the replacement thing. That's what happens if you have any duplicates there already. Anyway, that's step 1. So step 2 is click on this one, right-click, and say submit new or corrected data. All right. Let me talk about 2 points on that. First of all, to do any of these menu commands, it comes up a fair amount, especially for folks who've used old versions of the program because it worked a little differently. Make sure you're highlighting the whole line by clicking at the far left, all right? And then, because then you can do the things that operate on the whole issue. One of those things is submitting new or corrected data about it. All right, so what that does is it basically bundles the whole thing up to everything you've got about that issue. It sends it in a nice little bundle to our editors, and then tells us, it basically gives it to us in a format where we can very easily chew the data, where our editors get a little console up that highlights who you are, highlights in red what's different about what you said versus what we said, and then they can very quickly say accept, don't accept, and handle all that stuff very quickly. And we get literally thousands and thousands of questions every week, so this is absolutely the way we would like you to send us new data. Now, I actually, because I'm working here at ComicBase Central, I actually, when I dragged over Cowpuncher, I copied directly into the database store that we use to drive everything we do. If it were any of you guys and you were submitting your picture and it was better than our picture, you would have gotten a second prompt right now which says, hey, we've noticed you have a picture and it's bigger than our picture. Can we have it? At which point, if you say yes, it transmits it to us and the editors. You actually get a second correction point if you want to see get your name on the leaderboard. You get one for the data, and you get another one for having a better picture. So it's a twofer for you if you do send us pictures on that one. Anyway, what will happen then is it transmits it up to us. The editors, at the end of pushing each week's update, will drag in all the pictures that went in over the whole thing, and then they get the same sort of dialogue you just saw with me, saying, all right, well, the old picture looked like this, the new picture looks like this, do you want to take the new picture? Unless there was new old picture, in which case it just goes straight in. Anyway, this is how we actually manage to chew all that much data every week. And when you guys get your updates and you see that there are, several thousand new issues added or issue changes and everything, that correction process is a big part of that. So anyway, that's how it all works. But please, everyone has weird stuff in their collection that no one except you has ever seen before. At least very few people other than you have ever seen before. By all means, please do send that stuff to us, because we can put it out there and it becomes part of the global knowledge of the program, and we can put it out there for everybody. So that's a great thing to do, and we keep a little leaderboard of the correction reports, and I do have a standing offer of, if I'm ever at Comic-Con, anyone who's on the leaderboard anywhere in the top 200, drinks are on me. So I hope you take me up on that next time we're all in San Diego again. Some better year than 2020. All right. Let's see what else we got going on here. Okay, chat has been fairly quiet. All right, last question that got sent in for the whole thing. Mark Eigel was pointing out that the graph, and let me go ahead and show the value graph on this one. Value graph. And okay, I'm just going to pick a random issue here. The third issue of Cowpuncher, which apparently is not particularly interesting because it does not have a woman tied up on the cover. Anyway, that one apparently has been treading water at $85 forever. Anyway, but Mark's problem is using Parallels Desktop, which is emulation software on a Macintosh, and this value graph was getting all squished up. Now, the other critical part of this question, if this applies to you, if you ever see that your display looks strange, is that recent Macs have crazy resi displays. They have what Apple calls Retina displays, which are well in excess of the 96 dpi Windows standard. It's equivalent to a 4K monitor by anyone else, but they have very resi displays, and to deal with the fact that if they showed everything pixel for pixel the way they would on a normal monitor, it would make everything so impossibly small you wouldn't be able to stand it. So what they do is they have all these pixels, and they use them for rounding the edges of things and making everything look especially gorgeous, on curved and rounded things. But they scale everything up, and so you get what's called anti-alias text. But it's magnified somewhat, and it's done in a couple of different places. Now, Windows will happily do it for you in their neck of the worlds, but Parallels Desktop also has facility to scale the display. And what happens is, if Parallels Desktop has said, hey, I'll scale the display for you, but then tells Windows, I didn't scale the display at all, or maybe it says, I did scale the display, you scale it, you can wind up with sort of double scaling of the whole thing, and it winds up distorting things like graphs. So Mark had this issue where the graph over on the right here was just glurped up. It was overwriting itself. It was about half the size it should have been. And through a bit of experimentation, he found out the issue. And this isn't a ComicBase thing. This is really more of a Parallels Desktop thing. But because it comes up, we have a lot of Mac customers who are running Parallels to use ComicBase because, as all of you know, ComicBase is Windows software. So it runs on Macs if you use something like Parallels Desktop or Boot Camp or some other way of running that stuff on your Mac. Anyway, the magic sauce, he figured out, is in Parallels. Go to View, select Retina Options, and you apparently have three choices. There's Scaled, there's Best for Retina, and there's More Space. The default is Best for Retina. Well, apparently Best for Retina is not best for you. What you want to do is change it to More Space, the third option, and the problem goes away. All right, that is a long way to get there, but if you have that problem on your Retina display, I hope that helps you. And at some point, if any of you guys have Parallels Desktop, I do not have it here because I'm running it on a Windows machine. It'd be great if you could send me a shot of that graph, of that dialogue, because what I'll do is I'll throw it in the knowledge base, and then I can write that up as a little tech article, and anyone who's having that issue can search for it, and hopefully they'll find the issue without too much grief. Okay, let's see here. Oro says, at one point, oops, let me switch the keying back on. At one point, there's a Photoshop action that automated a number of steps that covers file sizes were consistent. Is there a newer version available for the larger cover scans? It would be a help. Okay, so there used to be, what it was is we used to have the comics in ComicBase going back like, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, were standardized so that at 96 DPI, you would have a scan that was as big in real life as it would be. Sorry, I got to frame my hands here so they're on the monitor. So if you're holding the comic book right up in front of you, it would be as big in real life as if you stuck it up on top of the monitor. So you could put them side by side. It was kind of cool, and you're not losing any detail. And so we were basically saving things at approximately, I want to say 1,050 or 1,100 pixels tall. We don't do that anymore. For the first 5 or 6 years, for the last 5 or 6 years, we've always saved everything we touch at full quality, as basically as nice a picture as we possibly can at a 300 DPI scan, and we save it full size. We don't do any processing on it at all. The only thing we do is crop them so that we don't show edge of the picture, and if somehow our copy's printed funny, we'll rotate it a little bit so it lines up straightly. So we don't do any processing at all, which is why there's not a macro anymore for standardizing the size. What we would suggest these days is if you're scanning your own covers, scan them at 300 DPI, and just do file save as JPEG, quality level 12 if you're in Photoshop, send it over to us. That's all you got to do. The reason we do this, so 2 points. First of all, why 300 DPI? Why not go higher? And the answer has to do with printing technology. So with printing, you have a thing called a line screen. So it's how many lines per inch you will print at. And it turns out dots per inch is you want to always aim at 2 times your lines per inch. High-res printing is traditionally 133 lines prints, which gives you 266 dots per inch, which they kind of round up, traditionally in computer desktop publishing to 300. Now there is such a thing as 150 line per inch screening, and there's even art prints that even go a little bit higher, like 175, 185, but they don't go a lot higher. And certainly nothing that's ever been had a comic book printed on it is, to my knowledge, ever gone higher than that in terms of its commercial printing. So why do you not want to scan your thing at, hey, my scanner with 3,200 dots per inch, I can make a 60 megabyte file with that whole thing. Well, you could, but you're basically, if you could see the dot detail to that final level, you would realize that you're essentially inventing pixels that aren't there in the printed version. You're scanning the space between pixels as much as you're scanning pictures, and then what happens then is when it gets mushed down to any kind of usage that we would ever do, we would take all that data and throw it right out again, and it would all get lost. So there's no percentage in going higher than 300 DPI for comics, and comics are actually one of the nicer printed items by and large. They're better printed than most book covers, for instance. Or at least they're on par with most book covers. To my knowledge, the only thing that gets printed at a higher line screen than that traditionally is art prints, which I've seen go up to 185, even to, I want to say I've seen 200 line screen, but I don't know if I've ever seen anything higher than that through traditional means. Anyway, so part 1 is that's why you want to scan at 300 DPI. Part 2, why do you want to save at quality level 2? 12, because it's as high as JPEG goes on Photoshop. For some reason, they just decide 12 is. It doesn't go to a 10. It doesn't go to 11 like was it Nigel's amp in God? Well, I can remember everything else about that movie except its name just at the moment. I can remember it's like Spinal Tap. There we go. Thank you. I knew it would come to me. But anyway, yes, it doesn't just go to 11, which is one more than 10. Yeah. No, in Photoshop they go to 12 for JPEG, and man, if you're someone on the Photoshop team watching this, if you could tell me, you would solve one of the great mysteries of my life. Anyway, but basically scan at 300 DPI, save it at 12, call it whatever the issue's called, send it to us, or dump it in your ComicBase, then send it to us, and everyone's happy. That's the way to go. Okay, Xandu Comics says, Jin, Legend of the Monkey King, has a cover labeled CP1. I have a scan of the cover. What would be the label for it in the picture folder? If CP1 stands for Collector's Preview 1, we actually do have a type in ComicBase called Collector's Preview. Let me have a look here real quickly. Let's have a look at Jin, Legend of the Monkey King. which I'm going to confess I'm not that familiar with. All right. Okay. I'm going to guess. All right, and here we get into titling a little bit. This is a little bit of comic-based comic book trivia. I'm going to guess CP is their version of Collector's Preview. And let's see if we're right on this one. Xanadu, is this your cover? Or, by the way, if this is your cover and you have a better cover to send us, I would really appreciate it. That cover looks terrible. Or, apparently it came in a couple different flavors. There was Ash 1, Ash 1A, Ash 1B, and Ash 1C. If any of these are your cover, then Ash 1 is your deal. If it isn't, then there might be a thing called a Collector's Preview, which also we could do. Little bit of talk about Ash cans and Collector's Previews. So, alright, when you're in ComicBase, and I double-click on something, and I put it on the same monitor as me, you'll notice that the comic issue type, alright, so by default, most of them are just going to be regular issue over here, right? But, and let me go ahead and I always try magnifying in, and it always ends strangely for me. But because I never learned my lesson, I'm going to try it again. Okay, so typically we start out and everything's a regular issue. If it's a regular issue, it has no special name or number in front of the issue number. It's just regular issue number 1 is just 1. On the other hand, if it's I don't know, Ash Can 1. It would be, all these comic types have abbreviations, so Ash Can would be Ash, book would be BK, and so forth. And you can see all the list of abbreviations under the comic type setup. Well, there are actually two different things that seem appropriate in ComicBase for this one, depending on what the thing is. We have a thing called an Ash Can and a thing called a Collector's Preview. What are those about? Now, they got their names historically because once upon a time, when you wanted to publish a comic book, and this goes back to the 40s, you would have a before you let me go ahead and switch the camera. Before you went and you were able to secure, I believe it's your second-class mailing permit, which is you need in order to mail your comics out cheaply to people. You had to register the title, and this also, by the way, is one of the the second-class mailing rules are also one of the weird things about why Marvel would take what was it, a day with Millie, which then became modeling with Millie, which then became Millie the model, which then became something else. Why you would take the same title and keep switching it, and you wouldn't just launch new titles, with issue number 1 and so forth. Well, it wasn't so much that they thought that they needed to, that they would be much more successful doing the number 1 thing. Just back when you needed to have a second-class mail permit to do this stuff, one of the things was if you ever broke the numerical sequence and went back to number 1, they more or less could catch on and figure out it was a brand new title, and they wanted you to file for the permit again. Whereas if you just added 1 to the issue number, and you could change the cover all you wanted on the whole thing. As a matter of fact, it looks like you could even get away with changing the indicia because what does the mail guy really care about that? But apparently, if we went back and made an issue number 1 again, then the mail, then the postal inspector started caring. Anyway, but they would do just absolute highway robbery with abuse of second-class mail permits by taking titles and morphing them through their run to have 27 different names, as long as the issue sequence would stay in line. Anyway, back to the idea of why you would go through all this nonsense. So there's a really neat comic here, and let me show you this one. You might have heard of a little comic called Action Comics. Alright. Action Comics. Everyone who collects comic books knows this cover, right? So this is Action Comics number 1, right? Well, sort of, right? Because the real Action Comics number 1, as far as the postal inspector knew, was a thing called Action Comics, and it looked like this. This was the Ash Can version of issue number 1. Anyway, what this was, an Ash Can was basically, they'd take some stock art, probably wouldn't even be colorized at the time. They would wrap it around a bunch of comic pages they had laying around the office. It would have nothing to do with what they would have originally published on the whole thing. It just needed to have the name of the comic on it. If the logo type was there, good, good on you. Issue number 1. They would then take this, submit this in through the permitting process, And then that would give them, I want to say it took 6-8 weeks, something like that, to get your permit back. And during those 6 to 8 weeks, then you would have registered the name Action Comics, you got your mailing permit, the copyright was yours. Once upon a time, also for copyright purposes and trademark, you had to register the trademark. These days, you get copyright and trademark just by doing the thing and keeping it up. But anyway, and I'm going to correct myself on that. I'm going to say the primary mover of ash cans probably had more to do with trademark registration than it did with permit registration, although they were both relevant. But I'm going to say if I was a comic publisher, I probably was more concerned with the trademark, at least these days. Anyway, but what would happen then is this was officially, as far as your postal inspector was concerned, this was Action Comics, and then you had a couple months and you could go out and release real Action Comics, the one that looked like this, and you were on your way. So anyway, that's really what an ash can is. All right. Now, since the 40s and 50s, there were not a ton of ash cans made. But what got to be really popular is coming out with before you were really ready to do the comic book in full, what you would do is you say, well, yeah, I don't have all 32 pages of the comic book, but I got the cover and I got 4 pages, or I got 8 pages, or I got 4 pages and some ads. So what I'll do is I'll make that the ash can edition of my comic, and this was very big in the 90s. This is the ash can version of New Mutants #1. This is the ash can version of New Guardians, or whatever the thing is. So it would just be these little preview samplers. Now, for historical reasons, when those came out, we played along, we called them ash cans. They weren't really ash cans in the copyright preservation sense anymore, because the rules had changed on everything and nobody cares about postage anymore. But we called them ash cans because that was a thing. Well, the 90s being the 90s, they couldn't leave that well enough alone, so then they said, okay, well, we'll do that, and we'll also do a version that's that, and it comes bound in with a trading card, and it comes with that, and we'll call it the Collector's Preview. And we're like, oh crap, we've already used Ashcan, what do we use for this new thing? And so we said, well, they're calling it Collector's Preview on the cover, we'll call it Collector's Preview. And so we played along with that, and so you'd see Marvel did a bunch of these ones, especially back in the 90s, and so those ones came up as CPs. That's where that origin of that term came from. Typically, if we're talking about something that's really just the promo version of something you're going to do, it will either be called Ashcan this or 1/Ashcan. And you guys might also notice the Ashcan exists both as a comic type and as a variant. What the heck were those comic-based people thinking about that? Well, sometimes the Ashcan is there to advertise the whole series, right? So I've got, Pete's Wonder Comics, right? And I've got a couple ideas for something. It might be the real comic title, it might not. It's, but comic convention's coming up. Pete's Wonder Comics needs a cover, so I get my first cover and I throw my first story in it, and it might never run in the real series. In a way, that's almost like real Ashcans. And so that'd be Ashcan 1 of Pete's Wonder Comics. Well, okay, months go by, comic convention's over. It's now December, I finally ship Pete's Wonder Comics #1. I've had some time to think about it. I finished out some other stories I was working on. So Pete's Wonder Comics #1 may or may not have any relationship to the Ashcan I put out earlier. At which point, the right decision was, the thing I put out earlier is Ashcan 1, and the thing I put out as Pete's Wonder Comics #1 is whatever Pete's Wonder Comics #1 was, right? Okay, that can happen, right? Where it's completely different cover, completely different contents, etc. In which case, Ashcan as a type is that's what that is. Now, Ashcan as a variant, that's really there for the situation where Pete's Wonder Comics #1, I have a very firm idea where I'm going with the whole thing. It's just I haven't gotten around to finishing it. But I know what the cover looks like. I know what the first story looks like. I'll fill the rest of it with ads or something. And at that point, what happens is the Pete's WonderCon convention preview edition, or collector's prelim, whatever the heck I'm going to call that thing, we'll probably put that in as 1/Ashcan, because when the real version comes out, it looks exactly like it, except it's thicker. It's actually got the rest of the stories. So one will be the Ashcan variant of #1, and considered more loosely, Ashcan 1 would just be a preview for the series itself. It may have nothing to do with a particular issue. That's where that ephemera comes from. So I hope we've beaten this to death enough. And Zandu, once again, if you do have an idea of what the particular cover was that you're looking at, please send it along. And if you do have a copy of, if it was one of those collector's previews that I pointed to earlier, please send it our way, because honestly, the covers we have are terrible for Jin the Monkey King. Okay, so on to kind of like the main topic of the podcast, which, good Lord, I've been babbling a long time. Anyway, let's get on to it. Okay, time check. Let's do this more in the future. So we have been doing ComicBase, and the good news here is I don't need to look at the screen, so I can take my glasses off. So we've been doing ComicBase a long time. We're coming up on our 30-year anniversary in another year and a half. So that is crazy long for anyone to do anything. And during that time, we shipped, as many of you guys know, famously on 6 floppy disks. Now granted, they were dual-sided floppy disks, or high-density floppy disks. I want to say they held 1.2 megabytes each. I mean, it's a ton of info, and we were using cutting-edge compression algorithms to squish the extra couple bytes onto each one. But anyway, we started out on 6 floppy disks. When CDs came along, we couldn't have been happier. But then eventually we outgrew CDs. And then there was CDs originally held 650 megs, and they had 70. They got them up to 700, and I want to say even 750 megs, because you could overwrite the end of the spindle if you had a compatible player and stuff. Then DVDs came out, and it was like 5 times the space of the CDs. Yay! But then we filled those up. Double layer DVDs came out. We filled those up. We got to the point now where the things we ship on disc right now, we ship nothing that fits on a CD anymore. We can't even ship you a copy of ComicBase free on a disc, on a CD anymore. So CDs, as far as we're concerned, are done. Now the good news is for the optical drive in your computer, typically if you've got late stage optical drive, it reads all the formats that came before it. Anyway, for us, our typical, our lowest end product that we ships on a single layer DVD. It takes about a gig and a half. It's ComicBase Express. So it's the program, it's the database that comes with it, it's a bunch of pictures and so forth, and it takes about a gig and a half of that disk. ComicBase Pro takes, I want to say, about 2.5 gigabytes of that same kind of disk. And then we get into the dual layer DVDs, and we talk about the archive edition. We started out on 1 dual layer DVD. I want to say originally it was even on a single layer DVD. It became a double layer DVD. Then it became 2 double layer DVDs. Then 3. Last year it became 4. And honestly, I don't want to go any further. I take the lesson from Microsoft Flight Simulator that after a while, giving people more disks to install data from is just a pain in the butt. It's not helping anyone. Incidentally, so just to complete the story, when Blu-rays came out, so Blu-rays were originally 25 gigabytes, and the burners came out, and we knew what to do exactly with all that data as soon as they came out. So we were the very first program to ship commercially for the PC on Blu-ray. And I also want to say that we were the very first one to ship commercially on dual-layer Blu-ray, because once again, content we got, tons of it. But even the Blu-ray, I'm going to say we're having trouble squishing in the level of quality we want to get into the different media. And so we've been having a real serious think about what to do. On the Blu-ray end of things, we're like, well, do we go to 2 Blu-rays? I'm like, geez, it takes, some people's machines, it takes an hour to install 1 Blu-ray, because not all Blu-ray burners are the fastest. But I'm already giving you 50 gigs of content on this one. Does installing for an hour and then coming out and having a second hour of installation, is that fun for anybody? I don't think so. For that matter, if you get DVDs, and you've got them right now, you we'll do 4 DVDs. You can buy them in physical format, and up until very recently, we were very much encouraging people, please buy them in physical format, because we had so much trouble over the years with people's internet connections, who would they would download the various parts of the different discs, and early browsers would choke out if you didn't have if you had any files bigger than 2 gigabytes. So we'd have to split the discs into 4 or 5 different pieces to get them to come down and be downloadable, and then you'd have to put them in separate folders, and then you'd have to install each folder and put the new folder in there, and it was just enough mechanics for doing the whole thing that would just inevitably end up in a tech support call for us. And so we started adding this messaging to the website, which is, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's basically said, for the love of God, don't download this thing unless you absolutely have to. And yes, we do have people who, the primary thing I'd say is foreign customers who have a lot of trouble with customs. So when there are countries in the world where if you buy something that costs $100 or $130, it comes with a form that you got to fill out before you're allowed to touch the thing. First of all, the thing rots in customs forever, but then it comes with a form that says, "And I'd like you to hand over the additional $1 jillion in customs duties to be able to take receipt of this package." So the rules of your country, the rules of your country. I don't have a stake in that one, but I certainly would understand if they were the rules of my country, that I had to pay $1 jillion extra every time I got a package from England or something like that. I would say, gosh, can I download this thing? And then I would never become an issue as to how much the thing that I just downloaded cost. It'd be between me and my ISP and not me and my mailman. And so what we used to definitely do is we said, look, don't download this thing unless you're in a country or place where mail delivery is a problem. So that was the delicate way that we'd say, guys, do what you gotta do. But realistically, if you were a US guy, way easier just to get the discs. Well, I've sensed that that's no longer true. Now, I'm going to just put it out here. I don't really have a lot of data to back up ISP speeds in any kind of real way. Like, there's data in the world that will tell me, for instance, what percentage of the browsing public has a screen that's 1368 by 768 or larger, because you're basically what happens is every time you go to a website, your browser thinks on you and tells you how big your monitor is to the site that aggregates all this stuff. And there's certain sites that kind of sit in the middle of everything where they get a lot of everybody's traffic, and so they can just say, hey, for all the ones we saw, here are the plethora of screen sizes we saw come through. And so you can get a pretty good approximation for what are the screen sizes you gotta support if you want to live on the in the modern world. Which, by the way, is why 768 is the absolute minimum that that you gotta have to be a user of ComicBase 2020. And we tried like crazy to get our dialects, and we squished some of them really hard to hit that level, because if you have a laptop, that seems to be the gating factor on that, and why we try so hard to keep all our data fitting that form factor. Anyway, I don't have data like this on people's download speeds. It varies so widely, and honestly, the promised speed you get from your ISP is not the speed that you often get from your ISP. I mean, sometimes it goes much in your favor. Like right now, I'm not right now, but the internet connection I had up until a year ago promised me 30 megabits down in terms of its download speed. It would routinely run at 50, which is great. But they only promised me 30, which didn't mean I only got 30 either. Sometimes it was coming in at 3. But it meant that I was within my rights to call them and complain if I was getting 3, whereas I'm not within my rights to call them if I'm getting 29, 31 or something. So a lot of times they'll underspec what they're really giving you, but anyway, it varies a lot. I don't have great data to say what speed everyone's got, but I do know the world's changed a lot over the last several years, and that almost everyone in the countries that we deal with, which is to say America, Western Europe, Canada, a little bit Mexico, Australia, basically the comic reading countries, the internet speeds have gone up so dramatically for almost everybody in those countries over the last several years that I'm thinking the way out is to really de-emphasize the shipping of physical media, which is to say, I don't want, if I can possibly avoid being bound by the limits of what we can physically squish on a DVD, I'm interested. Because right now we are shipping 660,000 pictures on an archive edition. That, even when you squish the heck out of that thing, and JPEG is an interesting file format because you can dial the quality level up or down as much as you need to fit almost any size. But, let's face it, I've got eyes, they still work, and I want the quality level to be something that I'm happy seeing on the screen. I can't dial it down forever and not have lots of really horrific banding artifacts appear and lots of other things happen. So as we try all the time to squish ever more pictures onto, say, the archive edition, we're fighting pretty hard to keep that quality level up to a level that we're happy with. So I have one other thing to throw into the mix, as you guys are no doubt getting where I'm kind of going with all this. and that is the release of the latest version of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And let me actually bring up. I lied. I'm going to put my glasses on because I remember I saved this picture because I was thinking I wanted to show it. Let me just quickly load that into my media bay because it should have been the first thing I thought about, except I kind of lost the plot for a moment. So bear with me just 1/2 a second. Come on. Awesome. Okay, there we are. Okay. Media bay, where are you? Here we go. Alright, that would be graphic number 6. Let's show that one. Alright, so this is the latest copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Except it sort of isn't. This is the collector's edition premium version of the latest edition of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, this is crazy involved. It has not only the airplane designs and the flight characteristics and everything else, but it has all the satellite data that you'll be seeing as you're flying, from Des Moines to Poughkeepsie. It is insane how involved, this product has become. It ships on 10 DVDs. I say, wow, that's 10 DVDs. That's 10 times, 8.5 gigabytes. That's, let's call it 80 gigabytes of data. Wow, that's almost 80% as much of a BDXL disc that we would love to be able to do ourselves. Anyway, they ship this special premium edition on 80 gigabyte on 10 DVDs, and honestly, it's just for collectors. You like having it on their shelves. Almost every other person on the planet gets ComicBase Flight Simulator. ComicBase Flight Simulator. There's our new product. Gets Microsoft Flight Simulator as a download. And they've been getting a download for a number of years. It was actually made all the industry news that they even offered this one is in physical format on 10 DVDs, because it's so insane, the idea of like saying, all right, insert disc number 8, insert disc number 9, insert disc number 10. It's just so crazy to think you'd go through that in this day and age. Well, here's what I'm thinking, and I very much want your opinion on it, so I'm going to read the chat in a second and I'll be like, oh, whoa. But what if I'm going to say de-emphasized quite a bit the distribution of ComicBase on DVD of any sort? So now, in a way, it's been happening for years. I can see the mix every day of how many people will download the versions and how many people buy it in physical format. As I mentioned a number of weeks ago, we took away the warning saying, hey guys, don't bother, we strongly encourage you not to download it in physical form, in digital format, if you're buying the archive edition, because there's so many download issues that came up. With modern computers, we've been able to pack the archive edition into 4 DVD sets. So it's 4 parts instead of being about 28 parts. So that's quite a bit better. I still think there's room for it to be better than that, except at the moment modern web browsers won't let you download reliably anything much bigger than 8 gigabytes. After that, it just chokes for no reason. Hopefully that will be solved in the future. At the moment, it has not been solved. So even then, we gotta part it up. But we can do things like the more modern version of the archive edition. If you've downloaded things, and by default, everyone's stuff is downloading to their downloads folder. That's probably the 85% case for all the computers that we ever deal with. And if you download into that folder and you say install pictures and movies, it says, hey, I notice you've got a bunch of big picture archives sitting in your downloads folder. You want me to install them now? And it just takes care of that for you. So once you've got them downloaded, it's basically just 1 or 2 steps to finish out the job. So that's not too bad. We've come a long way on that. But the other thing I can see as people are downloading the products, what mix of people are buying in physical format versus downloading, all the different things. And like I say, at this point, first of all, we don't offer the free and anything but a download. For the Express edition, we will sell literally a handful of physical copies of Express per year, and we will sell many, many Expresses, through the year, both new and upgrades, and we'll do those as purely as downloads. That's about 1.5 gigs if you're kind of keeping track of what the score is on how big those are. Pros are probably 8 to 10% come down in physical format in terms of our sales. The rest of them also download. And that is about 2.5 gigs if you download everything, including all the pictures. Now, archives, like I say, up until very, very recently, we've been saying, we basically made a deal with you like this. We said, look, it's $6.95 to ship, or it's nothing extra. It's just whatever the price is. That's the price to download. Now, behind the scenes, we've been kind of doing a little bit of gimmicking things. All right, and I'll just be frank with what's going on. So, depending on what our ISP was at the time, we were either paying a bunch of money to the ISP for the bandwidth, to shove those discs down to you, and that the number on that bandwidth was suspiciously close to $6.95, and so we were actually losing money every time we download. I mean, realistically, that wasn't why we were telling you to download it, because also, if we ship you discs, it turns out there's about $6.95 worth of postage, shipping, and discs that we're handing to you. There's actually a bit more. And we were just sort of, finessing the difference between those two. Now, of late, we've been putting a lot of muscle into getting faster download availability to things, making sure that we were hooked up in a way that if we got a massive download bill one day, I wouldn't get up in the morning and face a $50,000 bandwidth bill, because that would really mess up my day. But we're trying to make it so that we have, a faster pipe that y'all can access, to get as much data as you need to without it ramping up our bill to the point where, like, oh dear Lord, we can't hack this anymore. And we've made actually some pretty good progress where I think I'm going to say guardedly, I think we've got that problem solved. We're currently hosting off of, we've got both 2 primary and 1 backup, they're called CDNs, Content Delivery Network services that we can draw on, as well as our own servers. So if everything else in the world fails, or they change their rates on us dramatically, and where else, we've got a number of options to keep the pipe open and flowing. But our 2 primary ones that we're sourcing through these days, they've got a monthly bill we can hack, in terms of like putting up with the overall expense, and they're delivering on average up 2 to 3 times the speed that we were able to get going off of our own servers. And also, by moving that stuff off of our own servers, it means that it doesn't bog our own servers down so much. So that is a win, all things considered. I will take it. It's a win all around. Anyway, so I think we've got the download thing licked at this point. It's more convenient to download, and it's not going to bankrupt us anymore. And so, all things considered, especially because if we start moving away from the limitations of physical discs, it gives us more room to grow in terms of giving you more cool stuff without making you pay more for it. I am very much interested in, if we can, moving away from, buying a copy of ComicBase is a process of, somebody taking, a press disc, and it gets inserted into a package along with a bunch of instructional material, stuck into a mailer, sent through the mail to you, which you take on the other end, install into a disk drive, which more and more these days your computer doesn't even have, and installing the whole thing over a number of minutes or hour, and then booting the whole thing up. If we could take everything out of the middle, and buying a copy of ComicBase meant, all right, here you go, it's now in your account, you click a link, it downloads, you double click the thing to install on your machine. I gotta think that sounds like a win to me for most cases. And now I'm gonna shut up for a second and read some chat comments, because this is the part where I've been talking for a long time, and I really want to get what you guys have to say about this. Alright, and let me make sure the comments are on here. Alright, so, okay, so I'm talking about the Xanadu issue. We'll talk about that here. Okay, so the red cover, okay, so, what, ISPs aren't completely honest? I'm shocked to tell you. Yes, let's see here. You can literally fly over your own home. I have no idea where you're going on about this. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the flight simulator. Yes, that is absolutely true. It's like John says, "What, you want me to give up my coasters?" By the way, this is one of those times I really wish I had the NDI camera on, so I could actually pan you over to my wall of comic bases, where I could show you, because we keep a file copy of every copy of ComicBase that we've ever shipped. Going all the way back to the ones in the 6 floppy disks that came with the manual that looked like a comic book, and the whole thing was actually packed in a comic bag, which at the time we thought was really clever. But anyway, yeah, I would love to show you that archive shelf, and I anticipate having that archive shelf for a while, because I don't anticipate the discs going away, but I wonder if there'll be one of those things where, like the Microsoft Flight Simulator, there's a few folks who buy the collector's set, but most people don't. So let's see here. John says, if you look at the Blu-ray burn area, you still have room left on it for more. Oh man, I gotta disagree. So now I will say it depends very much on the particular edition of the Blu-ray. So what happens is we have a program on our side which so a Blu-ray, because people who make disc physical media and optical things like that, they have one definition of kilobyte, which is different than everyone else's definition of kilobyte, and it goes through megabyte and so forth. Basically, they say a kilobyte is 1,000 bytes. Kilobyte makes sense, right? Except everyone else has decided a kilobyte is 2 to the 10th power, which is 1,024. So it's a little bit more. So, well, okay, a little bit, 24 bytes out of 1,000, that's not so big. Well, it is. When you start piling up mega and gigabytes, it piles up pretty good. So a 50 megabyte, a 50 gigabyte disk only really has slightly over 45 gigabytes of real space. Anyway, we're shipping at 50 gigabytes of file foo, right? And we have 660,000 pictures we need to squish into that space, as well as the program, the database, and movies and things like that. And so we have to take all these 660,000 pictures, pick a quality level, from 0 to 100, God, not 0, and find the number that will make everything fit. And sometimes the difference between 1 or 2 out of 100 on those quality settings is the difference between everything fit and you had a gig left over, whoa, gig, or everything didn't fit because you missed it by 20 megabytes, and then you have to start the whole process over again. So anyway, it is possible you got a disc that was the one where, like, difference between quality level 48 and 46, left it, that particular edition with an extra gigabyte of space. But trust me, my friend, by the next time we burn next quarter's Blu-ray, that space is gone. Anyway, but I that's way too much trivia. But I assure you, there's not a lot more we can squish onto those suckers. Okay. Gregory, in the download feature you envision with the pictures still have watermarks on them, is that a major reason to do the physical copy? All right. I am gonna say, and this is I like this. I like to have good news, especially before weekends, so I can let people, if it's like your reward for putting up with these weird, rambly podcasts full of technical food you never cared about. So there's some good news, and it started out last weekend. As a lot of you guys know, we are using the Atomic Avenue servers to drive our downloading for all the larger cover images. And our deal originally is everything that went through Atomic Avenue got an Atomic Avenue watermark. Very subtle watermark. It was as subtle as they would let us make it. But it's there. And, like anyone who's just a comic book guy, if I could look at a comic image with no watermark on it, that's my guy. So for as long as we've had downloadable covers, so I'm going to say since ComicBase 10, it might be 11 or 12. I gotta say, it's getting a little murky for me on that one. But as long as we've had downloadable covers, there's been a very small Atomic Avenue watermark on them. But our deal was, whenever we ship new versions of the discs, those would all be packed in with no watermarks, right? So there was always an advantage when you got the discs of downloading all the new discs, and then as things download throughout the year, you'd have the watermark version. You could replace them when the new discs came out. As of last week, we no longer have to put watermarks on our images, because we're not serving them off the Atomic Avenue servers anymore. We're serving them off of our own servers with our own bandwidth. This is the upshot of having those those media content delivery deals that we were telling you about. And so we no longer need to have watermarks on the images. So anything you've downloaded that you'll be pulling down this week will not be a watermarked image. So yay! So what this means to you, right, is it means when you get ComicBase the first time, you install the pictures the first time, anything you download throughout the rest of the year, the thing you download is going to be as good or better quality than the thing we would give you on next year's disc anyway. So just let Sidekick download this stuff, you're good to go. And so that just went into effect, and so good deal. Gray says 50K is a lot of poker winnings. Yeah, what that actually comes from is again, people don't know that this is like the back end of things. Is that depending on where you are and what your deal is for your ISP, providing service, typically you sign a contract that says like, yeah, okay, for X amount of monthly cost, we will, you give us, X many terabytes of bandwidth, and we, write you a large check for that amount. But then it's like going over on your cell bill back in the old days, where there was not unlimited cell stuff. Companies still face that in almost all of our deals, where we say, okay, yeah, well, so the first terabyte costs you this small amount of money, but the next 500 megabytes is 4 times that, and the next bunch after that is significantly more than that. And so you get companies that would like, they'd post a video of their own that wasn't on YouTube or something like that, and it would go viral. They're like, oh, that's great, everyone download our stuff, and holy crap, did you see the bandwidth bill for this month? And yeah, it literally back in, before YouTube came along and it became like the place where everyone would host their their videos at, it would be the thing that would just bury the company. So yeah, everyone had to be super careful about that. Now, everyone's solution for that is everyone hosts their video on YouTube with everything good and bad that comes with that. Mostly it means that YouTube gets to run ads in the middle of your stuff if you're over a certain level. Which, by the way, guys, if you would hit like and subscribe, if you have not already, to this podcast, helps us out a lot, because we do want to build the audience base on the whole thing, because other things, it opens up certain venues for getting the word out that we would only have once we have a certain number of watching hours and subscribers and things like that. Plus, it's just cool. We like seeing the feedback. So do take a moment, either now or when you're done with the whole thing, and just hit that like and subscribe button, please. But anyway, YouTube kind of became everyone's ISP of choice for video content. And video is a demon in terms of serving up stuff. But remember us, we're the picture guys. We are huge amounts of bandwidth that we can consume just serving up picture archives with your stuff. And so it doesn't take many customers. I mean, if we put out a new release and 5,000 people download a new copy of ComicBase, and that hits our bandwidth bill, and we're on a metered connection, we're going to get murdered. It's the bill we would get from Amazon or whoever we got just for the bandwidth alone. It was our second largest expense after employees during the cost of the month until quite recently. So yeah, we do have to watch that out for that one. The deal we have going on right now with both of our primary bandwidth servers that we're using is basically we buy a big hunk of bandwidth from you and it gets served up very quickly, but once that bandwidth gets expended, then what happens is, we sent you over to get the file. That'll be stuck in a little frame, and there'll probably be an ad somewhere down at the bottom of the whole thing that you have to see the ad. It's not video ads. It's just like, buy, Fluey's cigarettes. I have no idea what they advertise on the whole thing, but Media Creator Pro 73, whatever they're doing. But they get the right to serve an ad in exchange for serving up the next 8.5 gigabytes of content that we want to give them after we hit our caps. And I'm like, you know what? I can live with that. And I hope all of you can live with it as well. The one thing that prevents us from doing is because after you hit those caps, it gets you into a mode where you need to have this other experience where you're looking at a web page as opposed to just pulling the data directly. It does limit us a little bit in terms of how slick we can make the installers. I was very much hoping for a while there to make it so that we could, you could just, I'm thinking about if you guys ever had the game Red Dead Redemption, which is like 100 gigs of content. It's crazy. It's 2 Blu-rays. And so basically I went to play it one night. I was like, hey, I got some time. Let's play some video games. And it's like, okay, it's now 2.5 hours later, and I'm going to go to bed because I haven't played the game yet, but at least it's downloading. Hopefully by the morning it'll download and I can play it tomorrow, which is kind of my experience with Red Dead and why I've never really caught on to it. But anyway, that would actually be an improvement over what we're asking you to do right now, saying, hey, download these 4 big, picture archives, or if you get a Blu-ray, download this, 50 gigs of picture content, which comes in, 7 different parts or something, and then stitch those all together, and then, and then we do that. I would like to make it so you could click one thing and pull all the parts together, ideally off a server, and not do the download process separately. I can't do that quite yet. I'm working on it, but I gotta have that in a way so that if 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people do it all at once, I don't wake up with a $50,000 bandwidth bills. That's what's preventing that end of things. So right now the good news is we got more speed than we ever had before. We have an unlimited connection on our own servers that can that isn't hooked to a billing a meter. So if we need to, we can certainly serve things up at they say 30 gigs up, 30 megs up, 30 megs up. Realistically, if you're in Australia and you're doing it, you're getting 3. Which is fine. I mean, for almost everything else, 3 megs per second, that's not bad. I would have killed for that speed, 5 years ago. But if thousands of people hit it all at the same time, we get a problem. So that's why we're turning to these 2 other front end services first. But when they degrade, when we start hitting our big limits on those ones, and we can spread them out. That's why we have 2. Is I can, if we have a big release, I can put half the release on one CDN, I can put half the release in the other CDN. Unless you guys really just pound the living daylights out of it, both of them will deliver up, their speed without us have to hit that fallback state where it has the ad at the bottom. So I think we're going to be good on that one, and in case it does all go to hell, we've still got a couple backups as well. But anyway, that's kind of where that's at. This was, again, far less clearly presented than I meant to, but hopefully I can answer questions on that if I can. All right, so no watermarks is yay, absolutely. Jet City says download works for me. And Greg wants to remember about the dedicate thread. So just wrapping it up. So here's kind of what I'm thinking life is going forward. And you guys might have also noticed that we changed very, very subtly the way that downloads work with Archive in the last couple weeks. Maybe you guys noticed, maybe you didn't. I'm thinking from where I'm sitting right now that for a certain spend per month, we've now got some pretty fat pipes we can serve content from very reliably to the outside world. I want to leverage that as much as I can because honestly, being part of the enterprise that takes colorful discs and puts them into packages and wraps them up and mails them to you, well, it warms my bitter little heart every time I help stick a label on something I see it go to an old customer. I'm gonna get past that, and I'd be happy if I just could do cool work and it just went straight out to you guys, and I didn't need to stick something in a mailbox to make that happen, or somebody who works for me stick something in a mailbox to make that happen. If it could go straight from us to you, it feels like that's a win to us. You've seen a lot of that with the latest version of ComicBase, where like every time we had a new version out there, we didn't wait to fix bugs. We just fixed it. It was on the servers immediately. Anytime you download, you always got the newest version. And it feels like that's a better thing than having to stage things for disc, around disc pressings and stuff like that. As much as is possible, it would be nice if we would prioritize the digital end of thing as opposed to the sticking discs in mailers and putting them out there in the world. Now, I do know there's a lot of folks out there who still like having the stuff physically in their hand. It doesn't feel quite real if you're not holding it in your hand. I like that too. Also there's a little bit of a sneaking suspicion for a lot of us, that when we buy a game from somebody in particular, that unless we've got it physically, is it really ours? Because couldn't they do something that takes this away from me digitally, at some point in the future? Now, maybe that's less of a worry with software like this, where you're actually probably going to download it onto your own machine, so that I'm not going to, there's no scenario under which we pull something off of your hard drive, to make it not work anymore, in the way that, for instance, if you deactivate, if someone decides that, some Steam game is canceled, it just, I just bought Nazis and Klansmen 2 Electric Boogaloo, it's the hottest new thing sweeping Steam, and then for some reason everyone got sensitive all of a sudden, and so they decided that's now canceled. They can now take away my license to that game, or we should have a contest to come up with the most outrageously unwoke name you could ever come up with, but I'm sure somebody's made a game of whatever that thing is, and I'm sure at some point that thing has gone away at some point. Or maybe sometimes it's just a weird thing. Like we had software that we bought licenses to that cost just hundreds and hundreds of bucks for like a text control, and their server just went down, and so anytime that we couldn't log in to their server to activate it on a new PC, I literally would have to track down the guy in New York and say, hey, it's me again. We haven't talked for 3.5 years, but we have a new development machine and we need you to activate a key so that your component works, so that we can distribute software again. By the way, we no longer use that component. That was one of the things we left behind when we went to ComicBase 2020. Thank God. But yeah, I do not like the idea that once you've bought something, anyone is in a position to take it away from you. So I definitely get that people, there's an interest in having people, something physical that you own and it doesn't go away no matter what happens to somebody's server. So that's a thing. So I anticipate we'll still be making, physical editions of things. I just think we're going to be making less of them. And to test that, and again, it's like we, first of all, stop actively discouraging people from buying the archive in digital format. But we're also anticipate going to make a downloadable version of the Blu-ray now that we can serve it without bringing down the universe. I suspect that it's going to be a thing. It's not a thing right now, but I think it's in our future. But I also we did one very, very slight rejigger recently on the pricing of the two different versions, and it has to do with the shipping. Where if you buy any product we've got, say you buy an Express for $59.95 and you download it, it's $59.95 is all you've ever paid. There might be local tax if you're in Tennessee, but that's the end of the story. If you buy it in physical format, traditionally it's been $6.95 extra to get a disc in the mail sent out to you and so forth. And we were just pegging that on what's our average cost of shipping everything we ship, and okay, that's what we're going to charge for shipping. We added $1.50 to shipping. We just it's there's a constant in which we say, okay, well, just whatever the shipping cost is, it's now that plus $1.50. That one change put in 2 weeks ago was able to convert about 75% of the archive orders that we received prior to the $1.50 add-on to being downloads. And I'm thinking, okay. So yeah, it's like if you want a physical copy of archive right now, it's $8.45, and we'll mail you 4 discs in a DVD case and the whole 9 yards out to your place. And honestly, best case we break even on that package. So it isn't like we're trying to hose you for the extra $1.50, and I'm going to go to Cabo on that. That's honestly that's break even money here. but it also has a little bit of an incentive, and I'll be straight up about it. Is I'd like to encourage folks who are in a position to download it, because if you do, it takes a lot of machinery out of our lives, and it gets the thing straighter to you. And honestly, I think you're going to get a better experience that way than we would have before. Before, we encouraged you not to download it because we thought you got a better experience if you had it in physical format. I'm going to say right now, it's probably better if you download. It's immediate. There's not going to ever be an issue with someone stuck their peanut butter crusted fingers on the disc and you have to wipe the thing down. That's all. A lot of those problems go away. And I watch our tech support lines very carefully to see what people are having trouble with, and the tech support around discs has really gone way down. In around downloading as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think with the idea that ComicBase Sidekick will automatically be downloading, your best version of your cover, in unwatermarked format, I think that's great news. And I think that if you just have Sidekick running, I think the win is going to be, just let the whole thing go on autopilot, and every week I've got the new stuff, and then I think that's probably the best experience of all. Is I buy the program, everything else is good to go once I've installed it once, and I never worry about it again. That feels like the win to me. So in the chat, does anyone have a different opinion? Okay, so Andre says download's good. Still think you should look more at a torrent provider. I hear you. We can talk a little bit later on this offline. Because it gets. I feel like I've been down enough rat holes today. I really and I apologize. Thanks for indulging me, guys. But I feel like we went down the technical rat holes pretty deep. And I'm going to say there's a big technical rat hole ahead when we talk about the torrent end of the discussion. It's an interesting rat hole to me, but I don't want to inflict it on you guys just right now. But I do want to talk about. John P said thumb drives. Man, we looked into it. That was an actual thing we were especially thinking for the archive edition in particular. Is could we get ourselves some 64 gigabyte thumb drives, stick them on those, and they make thumb drive replicators. Where you stick in 50 thumb drives in the thing with a master image, and it makes 50 thumb drives. Use them for trade shows. Couple of problems. One is the price point just wasn't there. It was the cheapest you could find a reliable thumb drive that that wouldn't just be it wouldn't just be terrible. It was easily about $4 or $5 more per drive than we could really make sense to do in terms of going through a disc. It would have been a much more convenient format for, especially for folks who don't have DVDs, or Blu-rays in their current machines. So that part I was really interested in, and they're also very reliable. You don't need to worry about them, becoming corrupt. But we'd have to add on, like, we were spitballing it around at least $30 to a Blu-ray to make that one make any sense from a financial standpoint, and I just didn't see it. It makes a little bit more sense. It's probably easier to finesse for an archive edition because you can get 32 gig thumb drives reasonably cheap. In there, though, it felt like it was so close. It would just be like we're adding another SKU, and I didn't see it being like a clear win. So, the proposal was: do we have an archive that's a download? Do we have an archive that's 4 DVDs? Do we have an archive that's a thumb drive? Is it worth having that new product out there? Would people understand it? And it seemed like it was just kind of splitting the difference. Where, like, the same guys who would get the thumb drive also got the download, and so what did we really save by doing that? That being said, if we were doing Comic-Con and I had a chance to distribute them in person, they were like some kind of commemorative thumb drive, I'd be all over that because I just think it's cool. But yeah, I gotta think. I think the thumb drive is not probably the way it will go. Anyway, but we did look into that. And Andre said do it for the 30th edition. Yeah, we did it for the 20th edition. We actually had an 8 gigabyte thumb drive that came with it, which we got these really cool gold metal thumb drives. Unfortunately, I want to say they were just USB 2. But they were really cool, and we actually got them engraved on the side with the ComicBase logo. And I was pretty happy about that, but as neat as that was, it feels like 10 years out, it isn't going to be the way that the future goes forward. Maybe I'm wrong. We got a couple years, we could maybe change our mind. But anyway, that's the show. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. But I just want to share my thinking on that one because like I say, a couple of these things, the little things, the big good thing, the watermark-free covers. That's already happened. The little bit of a emphasis change where we add $1.50 to the price of the shipping, that also has happened. I want to keep everyone's options open right now, but I'll be straight. I do want to encourage folks to move the download route because we kind of made the investments to making that better than it's been ever before, and I think that's where we want to invest into the future. It feels like it's more, as the wonks go, I feel like it's more scalable. And there's some really cool implications for other things, especially other products and bigger things like that. We'll talk about those some other time. But guys, thanks for hanging in with us. Appreciate it. And you guys have a great weekend. And I'll catch you on the other side. Take care.